Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you won't get. Don't you ever talk about me. Fighting. He's still moving. He's going to go down to the 20, the 15. They're chasing him 10. He's done. He's rolling. He's right down the middle. Tyler Lockett, he's got it in the middle of the field. He gets the block. 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. How in the world did they do that?
This offense, just in general. I mean, you had a guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man. All the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the HawksZone Rundown with Armac and your boy B Rice. And today we got a pretty cool show, man. We got Dayna O'Gorman coming on the show, NFL writer and podcaster. So she's going to be joining us in a few minutes here to break down just a lot of stuff that's obviously swirling around the Hawks right now. Obviously, Schneider just had his big presser interviews. We're in the middle of interviews right now, and just talk to her and get her opinion on the just the season as a whole. So we'll get into that. But B Rice, what's going on, man? What's happening right now?
Not much, man. Just, following the trends of what's going on with the coaches search going on, guys that have interviewed. Like I've seen now Mike Vrabel's interviewed with the Chargers, and I think it's Dave Canales had an interview with Carolina. And who was the most recent one? Bobby Slowick. Slowick had his first interview with the Titans, and actually Ben Johnson's interview is now scheduled with Seattle for Saturday.
Right. That's what we're sort of looking forward to, right?
Yeah, that'll be a good one. I'm very interested to see. I still think Ben Johnson and Bobby Slowick are probably 1-2 at the top. But there's a couple interesting things that have come out. I've started looking at some of the pre-draft stuff for the quarterbacks and guys that they see and where they see that they're fitting. And, obviously it's Caleb and Drake is the 1-2 punch, and that just keeps flipping back and forth depending on who you look at. Jaden Daniels seems to be the consensus third quarterback on the board.
Right.
Penix is 4 and Bo Nix is 5, and they seem to keep flopping back and forth. The wild card in it all seems to be JJ McCarthy, though, now that he's declared.
That's sort of popping up around some mocks, eh?
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, he didn't throw much in the national championship. One, they didn't really need to. They could just run the ball all day long. But he can make the throws you need to. He's got the arm to do it. I think he's a guy, though, that if you're drafting, he's sitting for a year behind Geno. He's not going to be a ready-to-go guy. Like, when I look at ready-to-go guys, it's Caleb Williams, it's Drake May, it's Michael Penix, it's Bo Nix, that, you could insert them, and they're going to be an average NFL starter their first year. Couple other interesting notes just around the Hawks, though, like Mike Holmgren. So I listened to both 710 Seattle Sports as well as, KJR. And I've been listening a little bit more on KJR because they have Mike Holmgren on. They have Ian Furness, who's a big-time reporter down there for the Hawks. And he does segments with Holmgren. But Holmgren told the listeners that he had actually talked to John Schneider, that they'd had a pretty extensive conversation. And he recommended to John that the next head coach of the Seahawks should be an offensive-based coach.
Right.
So, I wonder now with Holmgren, if he's not going to be in that building a little bit more, just because of his connection to Schneider, especially if they go with an offensive-minded guy. It's just, to me, very, very interesting now, because I think when Pete got in there, Mike took a real hard step back and went, I'm going to let you do this. This is your show. And especially when Pete was still the final, say on most things. But now that John's in there, and Mike and John definitely have a, relationship from way back in Green Bay, I would like to see Holmgren involved with the Seahawks a little bit more, especially, because you got to remember too, Andy Reid came from Holmgren. So that offense that Andy Reid's running, yes, it's changed over the years, but its basis comes from what Mike Holmgren learned, who learned it from Bill Walsh.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. Everyone gets all enamored with all these fancy offenses, Kansas City and so on. They all still come back out of that Bill Walsh West Coast offense from the 80s. It's just kind of which tree did you fall out of? And again, Mike Holmgren, and this is just some history for people, Mike Holmgren, when he left the 49ers to take the job in Green Bay, the OC that took over for him in San Francisco was no other than Mike Shanahan.
Right.
So Mike Shanahan learns from Holmgren, then makes his own flair to it. Now Kyle's running with it.
Yeah.
You see Andy Reid takes it, goes one way. John Gruden goes another way with it. Like that's what I was saying, like on our last episode, how influential Mike Holmgren and Bill Walsh were to the NFL offensive game that we now see today.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that too. Like that would be great if he's involved a little more. And I think more than anything, like I said, I think I touched on it last episode with I think a lot of fans just want to see it like go in a different direction. So like yes, the NFL's changed, the game's changed, is very offensive minded now. Like we can look at the stats, like whatever, 5 of the last 6 or 4 of the last 5 Super Bowl winners were, very offensive minded coaches and all this kind of stuff. But I think it's more of just like having this complete opposite change, going in a complete different direction. And then secondly, if you look at bringing in an offensive minded coach, we have an offense that needs it. Like we have the guys. We're talking about like we talked about with Chris Clough, how we were begging for a third receiver, finally got one. So let's keep Lockett around and have those 3 receivers. Even if Lockett's your third guy now, that's fine. Doesn't mean you got to get rid of him because now, oh, JSN's emergence is your second dude. But now you got a third really good veteran receiver. Bring in an offensive minded guy that can get this thing flowing. Like, wouldn't it be nice to start just seeing like shootouts? Like, I don't mind a shootout, like when was the last time we're just in a crazy shootout or something like that? And I'm not saying like you want to always do that. You want to have some defense, but when you gotta get in a shootout, like then you can. And I feel like we got the horses to do it. And even if Gino's there, like you and me are fine with Gino, and even if you're bringing in a guy, he can sit. But I think that for a coach, for me, I think we talked about, would we be mad at Vrabel higher? Not necessarily, because he brings that discipline and stuff like that. But I think if we can have that offensive minded coach with that discipline, I think that would be a lot more sort of, you know, something fresh for the Seattle fans here, and that's all it is. It's a new start. Let's just completely go some other direction. Why do the Seahawks have to be just defense, 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 run, run, run? Like that era is over. Now, if it works, sure, but it's not like we're married to that for the rest of the Seahawks franchise life. You know what I mean?
100%. And the one thing I want to see with the offense, like especially if they hire an offensive minded guy, the biggest crux for this team, I would say, since really Bevel and Russell Wilson's era here in Seattle has been third down.
Yeah,
They cannot sustain drives on third down. It's always, hey, third down, we're gonna run the draw. And it drives me nuts, man.
yeah,
Like
it does.
you don't all of a sudden, because you hit third down, go into, well, and I think again, this is a little bit of that Pete Carroll. Well, we have a defense and we can play this long, elaborated. Oh, you don't win the game until the fourth quarter. And that's not a
Yeah,
bash on Pete. Like that does have its sediment that the fourth quarter is an important part of the game
right.
and you can still win a game in it. But that doesn't mean you
Be
play
stagnant.
for the fourth quarter. Like
Right.
you can win a game in the second quarter of the game of blowing the brakes off somebody. And just so to tie that in with third down, I'm looking right now at the rookie quarterbacks that are coming in. So Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, McCarthy, Bo Nix, and Penix. So who do you think is the most efficient quarterback out of that group turning third downs into first downs?
I'm just gonna stab at Penix.
No, Penix was
No.
one of the worst.
Okay. Okay.
So Caleb Williams would on average, he averaged about 13 first downs in games, like where he'd able to kind of turn them
Yeah.
over. And these are third plus 7. So this is how many third plus 7s he turned to third into first downs throughout the year. Caleb Williams was 13. Drake May was 16. Jaden Daniels was 11. Michael Penix was 18. Bo Nix was 17. JJ McCarthy was 27.
Oh,
Third and plus 7, turning those into first downs. So that's over 55% of his third downs this year. He third down plus 7 turned into first downs. That's a huge thing. That means obviously his offense was quite efficient that way, but that also means he's not making dumb decisions and he's not afraid.
right.
And so then when I go back and look across at just third and plus 7's completion percentage, he was completing 73% of his passes when they threw it in third plus 7.
Yeah.
Bo,
Absolutely.
Michael Penix was 50%. So
Wow.
again, this is where I look at it and I go, like, we can't get married to an idea. I love Michael Penix for what he did at the University of Washington, but the more I've started to dive into these quarterbacks and understand where their numbers are at, JJ McCarthy would not be a bad pick, sit for a year, and then see where it goes from there, kind of a thing, rather than just jump in and be like, hey, we're taking Michael Penix because of what he did at Washington.
Right.
I think this is again where you see guys fall in a draft because guys dive into these numbers, scouts, personnel
Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
dive into this and go, hey,
Wait a second.
wait a second.
Hey guys, welcome back. We got Dayna O'Gorman on the show with us today, NFL writer and podcaster. And also you can find Dayna on Twitter at Dayna OG. Dayna, thanks for coming on the show and talking Hawks with us today.
I appreciate the invite. It's kind of a exciting time of the year. Yeah, we're not in the playoffs, whatever. But there's lots to talk about right now.
Yeah, absolutely a lot to talk about. So let's get into it. So uh, I guess the first kind of question would be like just kind of getting your take on the season as a whole. And what I mean by that was like, if you look at the last two seasons, it's been kind of interesting, right? Like last year, this time, everybody's move was a little different, right? We were like a little excited. We felt like we exceeded expectations by quite a bit. Like people were predicting 4 wins, 5 wins, and whatnot. We finished 9-8, and we feel like, hey, we have some building blocks here. A year after Russ, Gino played good. Like we have a lot to work with. If John hits another draft, like we can go head to head with the Niners. Do you think that and myself and Bryce have been maybe a little guilty of this too, but were expectations just maybe a little too high going into this season as a whole, as this group with players and the coaching staff we have with, obviously we know the shortcomings of Clint and Shane Waldron and well, now Pete's gone. But so just with that group, do you think the expectations were just too high? And was this team maybe where they were supposed to be? Was this a 9-8 team? Was this the ceiling? And now people got all disappointed. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Like we're just expectations too high for this team.
Well, I think the easy answer to that is yes, but at the same time, it's possible because our expectations last year at the beginning of the season were so low, and then they exceeded them, more than we thought. We didn't expect anything out of Gino. He turned out to be pretty darn good, and a total surprise there. I think that we were excited about the youth that they got in the draft last year, and so then pile that on top of the draft this year, or I guess it would have been in 23. There just was a lot to be excited about. I think that where maybe we should have tempered some of that was obviously with Jamal Adams coming back from that horrific injury where honestly lots of players never play again after that injury. So we were like, oh, he's back. He's fine. He's going to be just as good as new. And obviously that was not what happened. I think that we didn't probably give enough credit to the rest of the league where they're like, well, they shocked the crap out of us last year, with Gino and that defense and, doing better than we thought. And then, all of a sudden it was, oh, they figured it all out and it's just easier. I don't know. So I don't know if our expectations were too high or if they were not lowered like they had been the year before. But I do think that maybe we expected a lot out of the youth of this team, and we expected a lot out of, Woolen coming back. He was so good last year, and then you're going to add Witherspoon, and you're going to do this, and I think that that's where kind of it didn't align properly for what we saw.
Right. Okay, yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense because and that's kind of what we're looking at. And I guess for me myself, just when you look at it too, like I haven't been sold on the coordinators, right? So I guess when I look back and because I got really excited about the offense, and so did Bryce when you brought in a JSN and a Zach, and you shot here we got a 1-2 punch, and at the running back spot you got JSN, let's get him involved. Now you finally got 3 receivers for this offense, and it was just like I just felt like, for example, the offense could have just been so much more dynamic and pick your poison kind of thing. And we saw what JSN's capable of, right? So, it just didn't, it never really worked out. It never really got going. And like
Mm-hmm.
Bryce and I were like, there was just never like an identity, right? So, um, yeah. So, I mean, I guess, do you think a big part of that was what we had as for coordinators on, especially on the offense side of the ball, if we're talking offense?
Waldron just got an interview. I don't know. Maybe we're missing something because every once in a while we would see these flashes, right? We'd be like, there it is. That's what we knew they could do. It was like they would have these like perfect, I won't even say perfect games because it wasn't perfect games. They'd be perfect halves or perfect quarters. And we're like,
Right.
yes, this is it. And you'd see this spark. And so when that didn't happen game after game or quarter after quarter, half after half, it was very frustrating. I think a little bit of it too could be laid at the injury of the offensive line. I do think that actually played a bigger part than a lot of people. Well, no, a lot of people were giving that too, but I think it can't be all on the coordinators. But I think we've seen the ceiling of what Shane Waldron can do.
Mm,
And I don't know that there's enough innovation there for my liking, to be quite. And I'm a defense girl. I love
okay.
defense, right?
Right.
But I don't know that there's enough innovation. I remember, I can't remember which game it was, and I'm like, that why can't Shane Waldron do that all the time? And he just
Yeah.
couldn't. He just would step on his own feet. But again, I do think with not having the full starting offensive line for the majority of the games and Abe Lucas not, being out and then not coming back and being who he was, and
Yeah.
Cross would have his hit or miss moments, and he just didn't have that consistency there. I think that was a huge part of it, but there was just a lack of innovation there
Right.
for my liking.
Right. Okay.
For me, it was like I looked at Dana, I looked at the offense under Waldron, and I looked back at like Daryl
Mm-hmm.
Bevel and the, I guess, Tom Cable era since they were kind of conjoined together, and
Yeah.
Shoddy. And at least in those two eras of the Seahawks offense, you had games or stretches multiple where it was like, that's how the offense is supposed to look. And
Mm-hmm.
things made sense. Like the play sequence made sense and everything kind of flowed through it. Watching Waldron call plays from even his first year with Russ and obviously Russ's injury to the last 2 years with Gino, it reminds me very much of how it was when they had Jeremy Bates in here. And it just
Oh wow.
never seemed to, like, Jeremy Bates was like this innovative guy and he was supposed to be all this and the other, but again the offense never really pieced it together until Pete came in. They got Marshawn. They said, you know what, we're going to run the football and that's what we're going
Mm-hmm.
to do, and you can play off of that. And that's where I look at Shane and I kind of went, you seem to have schemed up some great things, but you don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
put them together. Like I've got all the puzzle pieces and I can do one corner and the other corner, but I can't fit the middle of the puzzle together. And that's what it felt like with Shane all the time. That's the best analogy I can give for watching the Seahawks offense. It's like you have all these pieces everywhere, and you've got one play here to JSN that really works well, and this other one to DK, and then this couple runs here there, but nothing seemed to mesh. Like we'd throw the ball to DK in the first quarter, and then he'd disappear for
Right.
two
Then just
quarters.
stop.
Yeah, and then it would be like, oh, it's 2 minutes left in the game and we're on a drive. We're gonna just, like the Eagles game, we're just gonna feed DK the entire way down the field. And it's like, where was that in the meat of the game?
Mm-hmm.
And so it drove me nuts. And yeah, you're right. He has had two interview requests, as
Mm-hmm.
has Andy Dickerson, the O-line coach now with Cleveland. He had one. So I'm kind of the same motion. Like I want someone that's innovative, that's going to
Mm-hmm.
evolve the offense to what the NFL is doing now, which is, a lot of misdirection, a lot of this wide zone kind of run. And so tying that into the second kind of topic I want to cover, what did you think of John Schneider's press conference? His first one on his own.
Um, I'm going to get eaten alive for this, I've already admitted this publicly yesterday on a podcast. But
Nice.
I wasn't a fan. Like I just discombobulated was the best word I could come up with. He
That's
seemed
good.
a little out of sorts. He didn't really, it felt like he got told 5 minutes before, hey, by the way, you're going to have to go out here and explain everything you're doing. He's like, okay, cool. And that's the kind of guy John Schneider is, right? Like he's
Right.
like kind of a, laid back, nothing phases him kind of a guy. But I think I wanted more. I wanted a little more passion, and that could be a bit of a Pete hangover. Now we have to keep that in mind. We're used to those kind of press conferences, and Pete's last press conference was so emotion filled and so big. And even though he was still all fired up with Pete, and then John's like, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a lot there. I think that, and I think a lot of people have said this now, I'm not the first to say it, he really kind of let us all know that he's looking for an offensive head coach. I really believe that. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest with you, but just because I'm a defense lover. But I do think that it seemed to be a little more casual than I actually thought it might be. And I thought when he came out, I used the word salad yesterday, because a couple times it just felt like he was just kind of rambling through thoughts a little bit. But I do think I think that he came out there, he did say, listen, this is what I want. This is what we're going to do. I thank Pete for what he's done. We're ready to move on. He mentioned the culture a couple of times, but then you didn't even really get the feeling that he was all about the culture. It was him saying, okay, this is mine. Now let's see what I do with it, sort of a thing. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
Honestly, for me, the one thing that I found interesting, I kind of agree with you. Like he came out with the 2 little cue cards or 3 cue cards, read off them about Pete and like the whole decision process and everything. And then he slipped up, in my opinion, he did. And I get, I completely understand what you're saying by it felt discombobulated, because when you're dealing with Pete, it was always, Pete had an answer for everything he didn't want to give an answer for. John hasn't been in that situation without Pete right beside him, kind of dealing with that. And so when he used the term stagnant and then he tried to backtrack off of it, to me, that was like, okay, so there's been I feel personally like, I think Pete and John are great friends, but I feel probably since about 2018 or 2017, I think it was, when he wanted to trade up to get Josh Allen and trade Russell then, I feel like there's been a bit of a friction on the football ops side of things between the two on where they want to go with things. I get the weird feeling just listening to how he talked about that, the offensive mind, innovation, analytics, all those kind of things. And like you said, he did touch culture. He left it. I feel like this is what John ultimately wanted. Like, I think he's kind of
definitely
done living in the shadow and not having a say on the coaching side, the personnel, like a final say, I should say. Because he did get asked that question. He's like, well, I've been kind of doing it for 14 years anyway.
He got real snippy. He got real snippy with that question.
Snippy with that one. It was like, oh, okay, like someone hit a nerve there. But here's how I love it. I love Pete. Me and Ryan have both said how much we love Pete, respect Pete. But I do think it was a time where, and this is what I think there were a couple things that kind of went into Pete getting let go, were a comment he made, and John made the same comment in the press conference, which I still think is funny. Do you think this team is closer to winning a Super Bowl than it was the year before? And Pete said yes. And I went, I don't think they're there yet. Like, it's okay to say that they're not there and that this was an underachieving season. But it just felt to me like, if you're going to make this move, make it now and don't drag it out, where they kind of do what Mike Holmgren did. Like, Mike Holmgren went out on a 4-12 season and then he rolled into the crappy Jim Mora year. Let Pete go out 9-8. Let him have that win in Arizona. And like me and Ryan said, Arizona seems to be the Pete Carroll, Legion of Boom, Russell Wilson, stadium of ending Seahawk eras, because every single era of the Seahawk football in the last 14 years has the last game's taken part in Arizona.
It's so true. And I think, I mean, that could just be because we always play Arizona last, right? Like always, or that field just eats players for dinner, right? Like that. So, and so then you end up with injuries and all that kind of mess and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's a really good point. I definitely think John has thought it was time for a while. I don't know if it goes clear back to 17 to 18, but that makes sense too at the same time now that you say that. But I do think that definitely John pushed and he got his way to get rid of Russ. And I think that was a huge concession on Pete, because I don't think Pete would have done it.
No.
And then I think that once that happened, they're like, okay, here are the dominoes. What's interesting to me, and this has been thrown around, I wonder if you had Jody Allen going, which one of you goes? Because somebody's got to go. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if those are the conversations, and they might not have been. That could be totally, misdirection by the media or whatever. But I do find it interesting that when he was asked that question about taking control of the team, he's like, well, I don't really feel like I didn't have control. He got real brustly about that. I think that shows you a little bit of where his head is at. He's like, no, this has been my team. I just haven't been able to be super vocal about it. And now I get to be in complete control, which is a double-edged sword, because you get complete control. That means you also get all the credit and all the blame. It's both 100%. Of them. So I have to see how that goes for him.
Yeah. So kind of staying on that track. So, the first big move now is hiring a head coach. And I know, you just mentioned you're defensive minded, and that's awesome too. I think Bryce and I like that idea. Like, we wouldn't be upset if, say, Vrabel came in, right? Like, because the thing that we both talk about is, like, we want that balance of, like, discipline as well. Like, it's great if you're this offensive minded coach, because I'm sort of leaning towards that. And the reason I like the idea of offensive minded, just because it's a total different direction, right? We've had that defensive minded coach. We've had this run the ball and pound it out and let our superstar defense, like when we had the Legion of Boom and all this kind of stuff. But like, it's great to be super offensive minded, but also be a leader, right? Look for that leader and look for that discipline. We had the privilege of speaking with Lofa Tatupu,
nice.
and it was awesome. But and we asked him that question. Obviously you play with both coaches, you play with both Pete and Mike. Did you prefer a certain style? Was there something that you needed, or did it matter to you? And he said he loved playing for both, but he said he actually preferred Mike because of that discipline factor. So when you look at Pete, and it's well known that he sort of let his players do their thing,
especially at the beginning. Yeah,
right. But then you look at it, but they were so much better than everybody that you got away with it, right? It's like you were the highest penalized team, or one of the highest penalized teams in the league, but you're winning. So Pete sort of gets credit for that. Hey, we can take penalties. I can let my players be who they are, and it's all good, right? So, but then after, as a team sort of become maybe average or a little above average, that can come back to bite you, right? So that's sort of what we're looking at. That's why we're lean offense. So who, I guess, if you're John, or your opinion, who would be the top two guys on your list that you'd like to see take over this team?
That's tough for me.
Yeah.
And the reason that it's tough is I understand the need for an offensive head coach at this point. I get it. I'm a defense lover. I absolutely love defense. My favorite games are 6 and 9. Like, I love those, right? They're my favorite. But I also get the need to keep up with the rest of the league, right? Like, you have to. This is a pass heavy league. Everyone's all about the offense, and so I get that. I also, as much as I love and adore the ground that Pete Carroll walks on, get what John said. It got a little stagnant. It got a little bit the same. We couldn't get it to change. And so I want a little innovation in there too. But then I have kind of what you were saying before. You want that leadership. Yesterday on a podcast I did yesterday, they were talking about, John really likes a guy's guy. Well, then that's Vrabel. That's Dan Quinn. And I know that people bristle at Dan Quinn. I don't think people understand that Dan Quinn's been gone for a long time and worked for 3 teams since then. Like, this is not, Pete's guy all the way. But they are leaders. They know how to handle NFL players in the head coaching role. So you have that leadership. The best thing Dan Quinn can do too is pick a coordinator. Hello, like, his coordinators were killer, right? And so you have that too. And I think that's important in a head coach. So you get that in both Vrabel and Quinn. Don't know that you'll get the innovation that you might get with a Ben Johnson, with I'm blanking on the guy's name from Houston.
Bobby Slowick.
Yes, thank you. I literally was just reading through these two. That they're young. They're the cool kids in town, right? Like, so I get that. I also don't hate Raheem Morris. I know that he's not high on a lot of people's lists, but I think that he's dipped his toe in that head coaching role before too. And I think there could be some value there. But I think that if I had to look, probably, everyone wants the kid, right? Everyone wants Ben Johnson. They're looking at him. But I think if you're going to go offense, go young. And if you're going to go defense, maybe if you're going to go defense, just get Dan Quinn. And I just
Okay.
because I like Dan Quinn, but I think that if I had to give you my top two, I'd probably go Johnson.
Slowick.
I like Evero too, though. I'm sitting
Okay.
here arguing with myself. You
You
know
can
what I
throw
mean?
that
Like
one
it's
out
tough.
there.
It's tough. I like
Right.
him a lot too. That defense in Denver in 22 was so amazing.
Yeah.
So that's hard for me too. But yeah, I probably, if I could be like, this is the greatest pick ever, then I'd probably lean Ben Johnson a little bit.
Yeah, real quick. I love Bryce chime in, but when you talk about the young, cool kid, the NFL is
Yeah.
just such a it's so trendy, right? Like
So
look
trendy.
at our own look at our own division right now. You know, McVay.
Right.
You know, he's been around for a few years now, but just pretty cool, right? And
Yeah.
innovative and winning, right? Shanahan, like you just look right in our own division, and then
Yeah.
even in Arizona, right, with Gannon, kind of bringing in this
Oh
kind of
yeah.
new culture, and people down there are excited, right? So it's sort of yet to be seen how successful they come, but it seems like people are liking the vibe down there, and kind of the new
Mm-hmm.
GM, this kind of younger, the Kingsbury thing didn't work out. He was kind of a younger,
No.
innovative guy, but it's just that kind of like, Seattle needs that now, right? That's what some people are thinking. But
Right.
so yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong with either of those guys you talked about. So
Mm-hmm.
it's
Right.
that's gonna be interesting.
I think it's funny that people bring up, like, there was a whole thread on Twitter. People are like, they better not even interview Belichick. That is not going to happen. And they're like, people are like, why not bring Harbaugh in? Let's have Harbaugh come in.
Oh God.
And it's like, that's not going to. I know, really, I'd seriously not watch Seahawks football for a whole year. But the thing of it is with those, and this was a point that was made to me yesterday that it hadn't even dawned on me. But when you think about it, it makes sense. That's not what John Schneider wants. He doesn't
No.
want some guy to come in there thinking he can run the whole show. He's dealt with that for
Yeah.
14 years, right? And that's what you're going to get with a Harbaugh. That's what you're going to get with Bill Belichick. And so when people panic about those, they don't even enter my mind. It's going to be someone else. And a coach that's just been fired, like Vrabel, but is so well respected and people really like what he's done, he's not going to come in with that attitude. And apparently, from what I've read, he's not really that kind of a guy anyway.
No.
But so I think that, but when people start to worry about, Harbaugh and Belichick, I think that that's just kind of out of the realm at this point. So
Yeah.
who do you guys like?
So for me, I'm kind of on the Vrabel train if he's your kind of fallback, or Mike McDonald out of Baltimore because he's this innovative young defensive guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, everybody loves him.
Well, the reason I like him isn't so much for his innovation, but who he's kind of coached under, both Harbaugh brothers. So he's got that, seeing how it kind of should be done at least. For me, I'm not like, I like Ben Johnson. My whole thing is if you're going to hire that young offensive mind, they have to have a defensive plan. And especially with guys that have never been head coaches. Like for me, the layout on that is McVay, when he went to LA, he brought in Wade Phillips, veteran defensive coach who's been a head coach before. So all McVay really had to worry about those first couple of years was get the offense, get those players, let Phillips deal with the defense. So Ben Johnson, like looking into his history, he doesn't have a lot of great defensive ties to a lot of great defensive coordinators. That's why for me, my number one pick would be Bobby Slowick. His dad coached in the league for years on defense. His brother's the linebacker coach in Miami. His dad's actually still coaching up in Canada here for Calgary. But he's also off the Shanahan tree and that kind of San Francisco hierarchy. So I feel like he's probably got more of a chance of bringing in like his dad. Like I could see Bobby Slowick coming here and Wayne Martindale coming from the Giants now that he got fired. Veteran defensive guy comes in, run the defense, let Slowick do his thing. And then the other guy, like I look at for that same kind of reason, is Brian Callahan out of Cincinnati. His dad's Bill Callahan, the O-line coach. Again, those kind of ties throughout the NFL helps build that staff. So if I'm John and I'm looking at my offensive and I want to go young, what is your plan to build your staff around you? Because like a Vrabel or a Dan Quinn, they are so well respected. They have such great connections. They're going to bring in great coaches with them. The only scary thing with Vrabel that scares me is his first year he had Matt LaFleur, who got hired right away to Green Bay. And then Arthur Smith. And guess who's also fired right now is Arthur Smith. So I could
Don't
see that.
blame
Yes,
me.
yes, the offense was good, but you also had Derrick Henry in his prime, which made a little bit of a difference down there. But that's the one thing for me that just scares me a little bit about defense is you have to essentially get three hires right and hit them, which is the offensive coordinator you hired the day you get hired as the head coach, and then his replacement, and then possibly the replacement after that when they get kind of taken by the next team and so on. So for me, it'd probably be Bobby Slowick and Brian Callahan, and then Mike Vrabel. I just don't get me wrong, I love Dan Quinn for what he did in Seattle, but the thing that worries me with Dan Quinn is, like we said, McVay's in this division and Shanahan's in this division. And for whatever reason, Pete Carroll's kind of tree of defensive coordinators struggle with those kind of offenses, hence Matt LaFleur's Green Bay offense. And I'd like to see someone come in that's got a couple fresh ideas, and not saying that Dan Quinn wouldn't, but come in and, change up things, whether that's like a whole bunch of the personnel. But the one thing that scares me, Dana, the most about whoever they hire, if it's not Dan Quinn or Mike Vrabel, if it's a young guy, how will guys like KJ Wright, Richard Sherman, and guys that are part of that LLB and that culture, and you've already kind of heard KJ on his show say it's got to be Dan Quinn and the culture's got to stay the same and everything. And for me, it's almost like you got a young guy coming into a very weird situation. You're following a living legend, and it's like you've got a whole bunch of players that are still involved with that organization. The only caveat for me in that is you do have a veteran GM. You're not like going in with a rookie GM at the same time as you're the rookie head coach. So you can lean on John a bit, but that's kind of my take on their coaching search and who I'd like to see.
So a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, wouldn't it be nice if when they interviewed, they had to say who their coordinators are going to be? Like, but president, you know who the vice president's going to be, right? Like, that would be nice. It'd be like, okay, but who are you bringing with you? Because then I can evaluate this better. Wouldn't that be nice? The interesting thing about Slowick, too, is the fact that he knows this division. He spent, 3 or 4 years in San Francisco. And, he was, at one of the assistant coaching levels, but he knows the division. And I think that is a huge help, too. I think that would be, if you're looking at a guy, he gets it. He gets the NFC West, which was for years the toughest division in football, right? Without question. And I think that it's valid. I also really think that these guys, Vrabel, or Quinn, they've been a head coach. I think you take some lessons from that. You don't repeat mistakes traditionally. Second-time head coaches, if you look, it's about 50-50 if they do better the second time, but I do think that they do some lessons there. So maybe that would be good. Last thing about this too, and one thing that I don't think has been talked about enough, is you have to realize that this team is going to be sold at some point. Will that new owner want to clean house and start all over? So are you looking for a guy who, is going to get you, to the next level and you're another 14-year, or do you need a stopgap guy? Well, I would assume that John is looking for long-term. I don't know where ownership sits in that. So that always kind of sits in the back of my head a little bit too. But I'm going to assume the best and assume we are looking long-term. We want the next guy who's going to be around for a long time, some young, innovative guy. Fingers crossed, I hope.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's you bring up a lot of good points there. So kind of getting back on the field a little bit and obviously sticking with John, who do you think some of the players, I mean, probably know a couple of obvious ones, but some of the players that probably are potentially going to be cut. And then obviously we got to free up some money, right? Where there's some contracts there that, but and then, so who do you think might be cut? And then do you think it could be like a wild card or something that John he's on his own now, you know what I mean? So it's just some name that all of a sudden, or some guy that all of a sudden is out the door. What do you think about that?
I was asked, who's the player? I was asked yesterday, who was one of the players that you think is a total Pete guy and John can't wait to get rid of or didn't want there? Excuse me, sorry. The obvious answer there is Jamal Adams, I think, but at the same time, he redid his contract.
Right.
So, and that was John. John did that. And so it's like, so money-wise, I don't know that makes a ton of sense to get rid of him next year. Will that stop him? I don't know. I don't know that will stop him. So I think that's interesting. I would be surprised, but it's a possibility they also don't keep Quandre. I think that his contract is a little nasty next year, and maybe they redo it. Maybe they figure it out. I don't know that it would be the smartest thing to do to get rid of Quandre. And I know everyone was really upset with him not thinking he was playing his best this year, but if you look at the positional value and you look at a few things, I don't know where we'd sit with that too. I think one of the other wild cards is Tyler Lockett, but I think that's on his own. I think that's Tyler deciding if Tyler wants to play. I think other than that, you could have a huge revamp between both lines, offensive and defensive lines. I don't know that Darrell Taylor comes back. I don't know that some of these other players, that are on that bubble like that, come back. I just really hope he can convince Williams to come back, to sign the deal and stay. Right? That's all that. I mean, that is my wild card. If he can announce that he's going to end up keeping him, I will be so thrilled. But look at him as a player's point of view. He's like, you're going to have to tell me who the hell my head coach is before I sign here. Right. So why would he, why would he before then? So I don't know that there's a ton of real obvious ones. Otherwise, Draymond Jones's contract, I don't think they can get out of that anytime soon. They could, but
there's one name, Dayna, that I honestly think is going to get cut, and it's going to be sad. Is Will Dissly?
Is it Gino? Oh, Will Dissly, not Gino. Okay, everyone else saying Gino, and then
I don't think Gino gets cut. I don't
either.
Yeah,
that'll go for a little bit later in the pod. We'll talk about that, but I think Will Dissly is possibly someone that you cut. I think Nick Bellore, Brian Monet's due $6 million, so I think he's going to be a chopping block.
Yeah,
Jason Myers might be chopped too, I think, with his contract. And I know Evan Hill, who you talk to a bunch, would probably hate that and probably hates me for saying it.
No, but the rest of us agree with you completely.
But that's the whole thing is I look at it and I go, how many times did Jason Myers, with the money he's making, which is theoretically second to Jason Tucker, miss kicks that he should have made? And it's that's what you're paid that money to do, is literally walk out there, kick the ball, and you could go and get a younger guy, save your money. And I look at it, I just have him right up now. If you cut Jamal post June 1st with the designation, that's the only way you save money with him. And Quandre, it's even money either way. It's 11 million that you'd save essentially. I think both are gone, honestly, because
but then how do you fix your safety? How do you fix your secondary if you cut both of them?
This is the caveat. I think they might draft somebody, because they had in the mid to late rounds, they may draft a guy. Kobe Bryant moved back there this year in preseason and actually was okay back there playing with Julian until he got hurt. And then there's two names that we kind of forgot about. One was Jarek Reed, because he was leading the NFL in special teams tackles till he blew out his knee. And he's about the same build and style of play as Quandre. And the other one is Jonathan Sutherland, who was out of Penn State, that was a 4-year starter there, that ran the practice squad all year. So there are options. Yes, it's scary, because it's we don't actually have a confirmed other safety to go with Julian Love, who's under contract. But if you free up that money, you might attract somebody that you don't know that could be on the market, like another Julian Love 2.0 kind of a deal where you get another guy for 2 years. You have to make money for Williams. You need to keep him, or else we're dealing Sheldon Richardson 2.0, essentially, where we blew a pick and didn't get it back. And I think, like you said too, part of it is, who's the defensive guy that's going to run the defense? Is it going to go Vic Fangio still and do this 3-4 that for some reason we switched to, which I still will never understand? Or do they kind of steer back into, maybe if it's Slowick and he brings someone in from the Niners, the 4-3 that the Niners run, which is a derivative off of Pete Carroll, obviously. But that always bugged me when we switched, because I went, why are we switching? It takes so many pieces to run that defense correctly, and we just never had it.
Yeah, I think that so much of those decisions are going to hinge on this coaching pick, because we could have a completely, and probably, we'll have a completely different scheme here within let's say even the next 10 days, whenever they pick somebody, depending on who goes to the Super Bowl and that sort of thing. So I think that leaves so many of those decisions up in the air. And so it's hard to say. There are some pretty obvious ones. I've heard Will Dissly before, and because they have and Noah Fant. What do we do with it? You know what I mean? There's so many options there. So I don't know. We'll see. But I think that it's almost like the minute we get a new head coach, we're going to be like, okay, so this is who's out. This is who's going to do this. These are their coordinators. It's going to be real obvious at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that. So I guess your opinion then, just kind of what's the biggest area of need that we should address in the off season? And then kind of fast forwarding a little bit, we got number 16 in the draft. Who would you take there? Maybe not specifically, but quarterback, interior line, what's the? I guess that's kind of a all-in-one
Dana's
question.
defensive
But
side's about to come through.
sure, yeah. I mean, hey, but
Kind
yeah,
of
just kind of the
true.
big one, the biggest need, like, because 16, like Bryce and I talked about, it's kind of an interesting spot to be in, right? Especially
It
John's
kind of
history.
sucks.
It does
Hmm.
kind of suck, and then it's like, and I'm sort of leaning towards he might trade it for more capital, but just
Hmm.
based on his history and the fact that we don't have a second rounder at all. So, but what are your thoughts?
I think that the interior defensive line needs a lot of help and a lot of look. I think that we've got to figure out this pass rush, right? Like we have to figure that out. I think that there's no pressure on the quarterback at that point. And Mafe did step up. I mean, he was better, but he wasn't consistent. And so we'll see kind of how that works out maybe under a different coach. We'll see how that goes a little bit. Um, I know a lot of people want them to draft a quarterback. I am fine with that. What I'm not okay with, I don't think, is moving up in the draft to draft a quarterback because I don't think you could get high enough to get one of the without spending your entire life
Right.
savings, right? Like I don't know that that's worth that. And so there are a couple names that might fall back that maybe would be okay. Let's see what this guy can do. Going back to cuts, I'd get rid of Drew Lock anyway. So, but I find that those people who are like, oh, and we can trade up and we can do this. Yeah, you can trade up, but what's it going to cost you? And I think
Yeah.
in this draft, it's going to cost a lot. So when you look at the draft, I think that it is almost better and it is very John Schneider to trade back and stock them, right? Like get a stack as many as you can, especially if there's not someone I've been lucky enough to cover the draft the last few years. So you're there, and there's always these surprise picks, and I'm always like waiting for Seattle to pull another Bruce Irvin out of their pocket, right? Like where the hell did that guy come from? And worked out okay. I love Bruce Irvin, but and so I keep waiting. And then last year they didn't do that. They took two obvious players. So then that makes you wonder:
Mm,
was that Pete? Was that John? Where did that come from? And so
mm,
I'm interested to see how this draft goes. But at 16 smack us in the middle. Like, what is
yeah.
what do you do there? I'm not a fan of trading up unless it's just a couple places for a player that you absolutely want. Um, Otherwise, I probably would fill in some of those other rounds. I know
Hmm.
that's boring. I know that's
No,
so boring.
well, not really. I mean, I mean, I'd like to see them stock up a little bit,
Yeah.
especially that since they don't have that second round anymore.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, I just look at the draft, like the more picks, the better, because you're gonna hit on so many and you're gonna miss. I don't care if you're picking the top 10, right? I mean, we've seen that how many times. So yeah, for me, I think I just think he'll do unless there's someone that's there that he just falls in love with. But
Hmm.
like you said, it's kind of the middle of the pack that if you fall in love with a guy, I mean, John can be like, yeah, I fall in love with him, but I can get him in day two. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So I think I
Yep.
agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Honestly, and
Yeah.
like my thoughts in it is I don't go up for a quarterback because you're not going to touch Williams. You're not going to touch May because they're going in the top three regardless. Daniels is
Hmm.
probably going to go in the top five. So then you're looking at Penix and Bo Nix, who both, and this is kind of one thing me and Ryan have talked about a bit, is both of them are going to be turning 24 next year. They can't really sit and wait a whole lot of time, like sit a year behind Gino, because then he's 25 and now your kind of time frame with him is shortening and shortening. So for me, one of the guys that's kind of popped up that I think you might be able to get day two, day three, just because he doesn't have a lot of game experience is,
Hmm.
and again, I think some people think I'm crazy saying this, if we're going to go with a quarterback, is JJ McCarthy out of Michigan. He's only 20 years old. You could sit him
Okay.
and do what you did in Green Bay with
Hmm.
Jordan Love, which means you don't move off Gino. You can manipulate Gino's contract. Gino hasn't played so bad that he needs to be out of a job. He's
No.
top 12 in a league right now where the quarterback play in general is not back in the Manning Brady area where everybody had a Hall of Fame quarterback on their roster. And I think they need to address, like you said, the interior defensive line. But
Hmm.
for me, you gotta get two guards. Like you got, and
Oh, fair.
possibly like Abe Lucas just went in for it looked like knee surgery yesterday.
Hmm. Yep.
Is he gonna survive? What is this knee issue that he had? Because they never really said it. The only thing Pete said, I think, one time where I kind of was like, oh, this is worse. I mean, he said he's like, oh, it's like jumper's knee. And I'm like, that's your patella tendon. That's the same thing Will Disley and Jimmy Graham both had that were tears. And it took so long to come back, and it's a hard injury to come back for.
Hmm.
Maybe we go with a right tackle and like actually fortify the interior of our offensive line if Abe Lucas is good. And then, like you said, get that interior pass rush. And then maybe a linebacker. Like in the later mid rounds is like, I love Bobby, but Bobby isn't the player Bobby used to be. And I looked at how they used him last year. And I know, Dayna, you're a defensive gal and everything. I look at how they used him and what they asked him to do a lot of the time. And I went, you can't be asking Bobby to do some of those things like carry tight ends down the middle of the field. I said, when they brought him back, I was like, okay, cool. You're going to use him like the Ravens used Ray Lewis at the end of his career.
Yeah.
First, second down, run defender, comes off the field in third down, and then you put in your young coverage linebackers and let them kind of play like a Jordan Brooks and Devin Bush or whoever it is. But they didn't do that. And I'm like, okay, so what is your thought on, like, are we using Bobby right? Does Bobby come back? You know, like, what do they do there? And I think that's a guy that John might move off of just because I think he's a Pete guy.
Again, we won't know that until we get these new coaches in, right? Because some young coach might come in and say, like, no, leave him here. I need that experience here.
Right.
But you're 100% correct. I don't think that they used him the way they had planned to use him.
Right.
I got the impression from some of the press conferences and some of the things they were saying that they were going to use Bobby exactly the way you thought. He was not going to be an every down player. He was going to come in those situational and use him then. But the defense was so bad. They needed him. They needed him more than they thought they were going to. Then Nuoso went out and they're like, oh, well, crap. Now we really need this experience. We need this presence on the field. So I think there was a domino effect there. And so that's a little frustrating because that's not what we wanted to see. And yet he still led the league in tackles. For God's sake, he's still Bobby Wagner. And so I don't think that is the annoying limbo we are in as a fan base right now, is none of those questions can be 100% answered until we see who this new coach is and who the new coaches, offensive coordinators are and defensive coordinator, that sort of thing. Because I do think that Clint Hurt was not the guy. No shade to him. This was not his gig. He could not adjust quick enough. And like I said before, I think we saw Waldron's ceiling. And so, but you're 100% correct. And it goes back to my answer of trading back from 16, is that because both lines need help, you need as many picks as you can get.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Want to get your opinion before we just touch on Pete real quick here. On the offensive side of the ball, just talking about just sort of how Bobby was sort of not use his plan. Because me and Bryce have been talking about the running back situation down there. Okay. How did you think that went? Did that go as planned? Because we were kind of excited with Zach, especially being a second rounder. We just felt like we didn't get to evaluate him much because he just didn't seem to touch the ball enough. And then when he did, he had some exciting runs. What's your take on how that was managed overall with the run game?
I think we had kind of two thought process going on there. We had Pete on one side and John on the other. I really, really do. And I think that Pete knew what he had in Ken Walker, and Ken Walker's fantastic running back, right? But they're two complete different styles of running back. And so I honestly thought that they would use Ken Walker in some games and use Charbonnet more in the other ones. And I will tell you this is the funniest story. So I was at the draft. I live in Kansas City. And it was here in Kansas City last year. And so I was at the draft, and in the media room, it's just this huge ballroom full of tables of media people. They announced that pick and the place erupted. And the guy leaned across. He goes, "You're a Seahawks fan, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You guys just got the steal. You just got the steal." People loved him, right? Like they were all about him. And so then I'm like, really? Because we make fun when they pick a running back in the second round every year. But they loved the pick. And so then I was excited to watch him too. Right. I wanted to see what he brought to the table. But I think there was, again, I hate to belabor the same point, but that line was not what it was supposed to be. It was not what they had envisioned when they set the year up. And they gave him some trouble, I think, especially in the run game. And so then what we saw toward the end of the year, we saw Walker, what I said, pulling a Russell Wilson. He was running out, running backwards and going here, there, and everywhere, trying to get some yards. Worked sometimes it didn't. Yeah. And so I think it was just, they saw that Walker could have these moments, and I think Pete was just trying to stick with the guy that he had. But I would have loved to see more out of Zach. I think most people would have loved to see what he could have brought.
The thing with Zach that kind of, I looked at, and I was the same way. Like when we picked him, I went, great. Here's our power back. Here's Because here's
Yep.
my problem with K9. I love him. He's explosive. He can do everything. He can't stay on the field long enough. He's constantly getting nicked with a hip, with the shoulder, and same thing last year, even he got nicked up. And so I understood the philosophy behind the pick. I went, okay, you're getting some insurance because when he got hurt last year, after Penny went down, we had nobody. We were handing off to Travis Homer and DJ Dallas. I wanted to see it where Zach's your first and second down, pound it at the defense, tire them out, and then you hit them with K9 out in the flat, K9 on a stretch play, and let the defense have to chase him because he's so fast and elusive. The one back I was so sad that we didn't get to see any of was Kenny McIntosh.
Yeah.
And I got so tired because, and this is one thing, like just tying this kind of all back in and into our next question, there were so many guys I felt that were Pete guys that basically got kind of a easier kick at the can than others, like DJ Dallas. I hated seeing him on punt and kickoff return. I want someone dynamic that can take the ball and go with it. And that's not to say like he didn't do a good job getting the yards that he could, but there was never that threat where it was like, oh man, like I remember like when we had Leon Washington and Bobby Ingram and all these guys back there, even Tyler when he started, and it was like, are we going to get a touchdown on this? Like, are we going to flip the field here? And it adds so much to your team. But that's where when we got into situations when DJ Dallas showed up on the field, I was like, why aren't we giving Kenny McIntosh? Like, I remember listening to John say, it's so rare to get an SEC starting back, in the seventh round, and how explosive and how he looked in training camp, and he got hurt. Then he comes back and he gets like 3 carries or 3 touches the rest of the year. And it was like, why are we not using the collaborative backs that we have? And again, I think this ties into Waldron not knowing how to put the puzzle together. And I think it ties into Pete having a couple favorites here and there. Like, it's no different than Nick Bellore. I love Nick Bellore, but is Nick Bellore worth what he's worth being on the team as a special team linebacker where I can get some kid in the draft?
Funny.
Well,
Right?
I know, but this is kind of what I'm talking about with like,
real quick before we jump into the last, what's your take on Kenny Mack? Because I'm not, I don't know the inner workings, what's going on there, because I was super excited about the pick. Do you know anything about why he just didn't see the field at all this year?
No, the grumblings were that they were just sticking with Walker and Zach. The grumblings though were that maybe that injury he was not 100%, and maybe that was the kind way of saying that he just wasn't as dynamic yet that he needed to be, or they were worried about him re-injuring something toward the end of the season. But I think he kind of became a little cult hero toward the end of the season, right? We're like, where is he? We want McIntosh, and we just didn't get to see him. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands in all of this too. I thought, maybe he would take some series from Zach, but it just never got there. And so again, that makes me think maybe the injury was still lingering. And that goes right back to he has a loyalty problem. You know what I mean? Like I love that about him. And I love that he's, as a man, someone said yesterday, he's a one of one. Like that, it's so true. He's just the greatest. But sometimes he sticks a little too long with players out of loyalty, I think. And maybe that's where he and John butted heads sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. So, Dayna, we don't want to keep you too much longer. We really appreciate you coming on with us. So kind of one last thing, talking about Pete, just kind of like, sum it up, like his career here in Seattle, and like what the Pete Carroll era, if you want to call it, like what was your sort of overall take on the era? Like obviously you got the really good stuff early on, but as a whole, how would you kind of sum it up?
I am lucky to be old enough to have been a fan through the 90s. So I remember those abysmal years of the 90s and not even wanting to watch the games. They were so bad. And Walter Jones was the only bright spot, and so so Cortez Kennedy, you're like, oh, well, look, we got one guy, sort of a thing. So when Pete Carroll came along, there was so much excitement, and that's honestly carried him through his entire era here in Seattle, right? Came out with such a bang, so innovative, had the LOB, which was, and I tell this to everyone, that will never be replicated. That was a historic level defense. It will quit trying to replace it. It's not going to happen. Enjoy that you got to watch it and they were on your team, right? And then the shine of Russell Wilson, because he was quite the diamond in the rough for so long and so good. And I'll be thrilled when they put his name in the rafters, because that will happen at some point, even though I don't like quarterbacks traditionally. But Here's the thing with Pete. He was exactly who he wanted to be, and he ran that team exactly how he wanted, and it worked most of the time, right? And that is to be respected. That he never wavered from what he believed, how he thought, teams should be run, how he coached. He was always the same exact person. Was that a detriment toward the end? Probably. But at the same time, it was pretty much, for Seahawks fan, a very lucky, pretty much happy 14 years. We like to complain and oh, we only went this many, or oh, this was a terrible season or whatever. But overall, did you ever really feel like maybe they couldn't figure it out? And that hope, I look at the teams like the Browns, you look at the teams like the Lions, who oh my God, they just won their first playoff game, right? Like, that's insane. We were very lucky. So when I look at Pete Carroll, I feel very lucky that he landed in Seattle. We got to enjoy truly his prime of coaching, and he gave us this decade of super highs and not very many low lows. And I think as a football fan, that's really lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you kind of coming on here and hanging out with us and talking Hawks. It's been
Yeah.
awesome. Before you get out of here, why don't you just let people know how they can find you and what you've been up to and all that good stuff.
So for 12 seasons now, we have done a podcast. It's over. It's called Our Turf Football. Find it on Twitter. It's Our Turf OTFB. You can find us on Instagram and everywhere. But it's for women, and we've been talking about football for 12 years on this podcast, and we love it. We talk about all 32 teams. We are inclusive of all, and now we have a college segment too, so that's really fun. And then I also do Real Hawk Talk with all those Hawk blogger boys. Most Wednesdays. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of tiring sometimes, but and so I would do that also. And then I also do one other podcast that I do with a couple of girls from the UK that we do every couple of weeks, and we talk about football from the UK's perspective, American football from their perspective, and how they see things and how the sport is growing over there and that sort of thing. So it's a lot of fun. So
super cool. Yeah, that's busy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I love it, right?
No,
I love it. I get so bored in the off season.
yeah, no, for sure. And that's the thing about the NFL too. It's like I always say, it's kind of one of those 7-day 365 leagues. Like, the Hawks season ended, and day later we're talking about what's going on with Pete, and then he gets fired now, and then we'll do here we go, right? So and then the draft. So so there's always something to talk about.
It never stops.
Even when you think you might have some downtime, right? So
yeah.
But yeah, we appreciate you coming on, and
Can I ask you guys one quick question? So
Absolutely.
You guys know a little bit about CFL, right?
Yes.
Right? So is Dave Dickinson still the head coach in Calgary?
He is, yes, and general manager.
Yeah. So he was my high school quarterback.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
I was good friends with his sister. They're fantastic. And I always forget about him. And then you mentioned Canadian football in Calgary. Like, I wonder if Dave's still up there. So,
he is.
Sorry.
He's still up
there. Yeah.
That's good stuff. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, appreciate you coming on, and
Thank you.
hopefully we can have you on in the future.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Dayna.
Thanks, Dayna.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, that was Dayna O'Gorman, NFL writer and super podcaster.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
I didn't realize, that's a lot of podcasts, but man, that was awesome insight, man. Like,
oh, for sure.
Especially like what she said about Pete at the end, like summed it up awesome, right? I mean, it was like, here's a guy that, be kind of thankful. Like, it's easy to complain, and that's not her saying, well, he shouldn't have got fired. We all know it was time, but in his tenure, appreciate what you had, because you always thought you had a chance, even if you might not have had a chance. We were in most games. Yeah, you can say, well, we won one playoff game in the last whatever years, but and you're gonna look back and be like, you know what, that was a pretty great era. And I'm not even talking about the Legion of Boom and stuff, but just so the way she summed it up, man, that was That made a lot of sense.
It 100% did. And like you think about it in a lot of ways, like, you know, did you ever go into a season during the Pete Carroll era after 2012 thinking, well, we're going to finish in the bottom of the league and be absolutely horrible? The only year you did that was the year after we got rid of Russ, and that turned into a 9-8 season where it was
Right.
typical Seahawk football. We made the playoffs, and that was the thing. We were constantly always in the discussion. We were always in the discussion as a team in the playoffs or whatever under Pete. And I think that's something people really need to, in this time between when we get our new head coach and that whole thing starts, and how weird it's going to be at training camp. Like, you're not going to see the 72-year-old guy running up and down the field playing quarterback and doing
Right.
those things. You're also going to have to understand that you can't jump down this new regime's throat because it's not what it was. Like, we may be 9-8 next year or 7-10. We may be even worse than what we were.
Right.
And you can't jump down. You have to appreciate what we had. It was time for it to end. And that's the one thing that people always say, oh, the grass isn't always greener on the other side.
Right.
That usually refers to you jumped early. Like you did something early because you made
exactly.
an irrational decision. Pete Carroll getting let go wasn't irrational. It needed to happen. It was time for it to happen. It kind of organically happened in a way. And I think that'll make the transition a lot easier. And it's, I say that being easier, but it's not going to be easy, I think, for some fans. I think we'll see if the Seahawks somehow start like 1-5 next year for whatever reason. People are going to be calling for the head of John Schneider and calling for the head of Jody Allen and everything. People have to weather the storm.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I can't stress enough to our listeners. Like,
exactly.
Weather the storm. It's going to be, you've had more success in 25 years than most franchises have had, period.
Yeah.
Like, you look at Cleveland or Detroit, like Detroit won their first playoff game, like Dayna said, in 30 years. And for the last basically 25 years through Mike Holmgren to Pete Carroll, we've been to 3 Super Bowls. We've won one of them. And we've constantly been a division or playoff contending team every year.
Yeah.
That's kind of unheard of.
And if you believe in this organization, then you know that it would only be temporary anyway. It's I've always said, and you've always said, it starts from the top. Well, you have Jody Allen. She seems to be committed to winning. You got John Schneider. He's a good GM. So there's your foundation. Like, you're good to go. Like, I'm not worried about it. Now, if I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, you look at that organization, goes out and, the stupid contract they gave to Deshaun, they give Baker the boot, and, like, they're just back to being the Browns again, even though they had this, so-called good defense. And it's just, they're one and done. And it's, you appreciate what you got. If you got a good organization, things will work out. So yeah, like you said, give it time. There might not be a storm though. That's the thing. We might put the pieces together with the right coaches, and we might be on the up and up. And that's what people got to realize. And like I've mentioned it before, don't worry about the number of wins next year. They'll take care of themselves. The thing you got to look at is are we trending in the right direction? We are. And people forget, we're a young team. We're still a young team. So let's give this thing time, and let's, let this thing build, and because we're on to a new chapter. So, and then, you know what, the other thing that I found interesting, because, I didn't even realize that she was at the draft last year, and the whole Zach Charbonnet thing, where she was right there on the ground level, and people like nudging her, like, yeah, you're a Seahawk fan, right? This kid's for real. And now she's getting excited about it. And the thing is, she makes good points about the offensive line. But the other thing is, Zach's back next year. He's going to be there. So let's get this thing going again with Ken and Zach, and maybe, hopefully, Kenny Mack. And she might be right. Maybe Kenny was still banged up. So that could be your 3-headed monster kind of thing with Kenny at special teams and getting some touches, and who knows how they'll do it. Like she said, we'll wait for that coach. But you know what? That was this year. Because I'm still excited to see, because I still think Zach's gonna do some things here.
I'm gonna make a bold prediction, and I think Zach Charbonnet will be a longer term Seahawk than Ken Walker.
Right, and that's based on health.
No, I think it's health, and I think performance and just longevity in general. I feel like when their contracts come up, I think Ken's going to move on somewhere else because Seattle won't want to pay him big money. And I
Right.
think Zach will be the guy that goes forward. And it's just kind of my thought. And that's not saying I don't like Ken Walker. I love K9. I think he's a phenomenal running back. And I think that's
Talented.
why he's going to end up going somewhere else at some point because he's going to want more
The
money than what
money.
Seattle's willing to pay. Um, again, I think the more we've talked out this with our guests over the last few weeks here, and obviously we got some big ones coming up too in the next, couple of episodes. I'm really starting to reevaluate whether or not we do take a quarterback.
Hmm.
And I think it's truly like Dana said, a lot of these, topics and stuff that we're talking about, they're really going to depend on who the Seahawks hire. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see we can basically go after they hire whoever, who's getting cut, who's not going to be on this roster come next year. And so for me, I'm just kind of like, I'm really interested to see who they hire and when this whole thing starts kind of taking place, what our team's going to look like come training camp.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I actually think, like, I agree with you talking it out more and sort of looking at, especially talking with Dana, where we actually sit in the draft at number 16. Like it's not, you don't have a top five, so you're out of the run for the top dudes. And then so you're like, like if John stays at 16, we're probably better off getting somebody on the O line or somebody on that D line. But I really do think he's gonna trade it. Like that's just what I think. I think based on his history and how he and like she said, if your biggest needs are your interior line, the both offensive line and defensive line, then you want to accumulate picks, right? So it just makes sense the fact that and especially when you don't have a second rounder. So, I'm sort of, it seemed like she was sort of in that same mindset too, where she thinks, yeah, you know what, they'll probably dump it. And if you're going to try to get in that top three, like she said, you're going to give up the frickin' farm. Like, and again, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee Drake May is some superstar or even Caleb Williams. So, like at the end of the day, you know what I mean? You just don't know. So, do you want to risk all that? I doubt it, right? So, it's gonna be an interesting thing, but yeah.
There's one other coach I really am interested in for Seattle as a head coach. And again, this is something that we can talk about probably more extensively when we have Rob back on in the coming episodes here, Rob Staten. But Frank Smith from Miami, for some reason, he just keeps lingering in the back of my head as a guy that's was under Sean Payton and John Gruden. He's now been under Mike McDaniel.
Yeah.
I feel like he's the type of guy you could bring in and he can run. Like he's been highly spoken of as a communicator of what he wants done. Hasn't called plays to my knowledge, but you can bring in another guy that's going to be an OC that may call plays. I don't know, but it's just very interesting to me what this whole thing will look like coming forward and kind of, you know, going into it. And actually, there's an article right now that Jeff Simmons, who's on the show that Dana talked about, Real Hawk Talk, he just put out call basically stating his articles about the Seahawks next coach and candidates. So I highly suggest our listeners go and view some of that stuff. And honestly, guys, like getting information from me and Armac, this is where we pull a lot of our stuff is our fellow podcasters and stuff like that we talk to, because everyone's got such great insight to what's going on throughout the league and with the search and stuff that maybe isn't being told to you by ESPN or NFL Network. So yeah, I would definitely, just take a check out of the article, see what it says. So yeah.
Yeah, no, good stuff. Yeah, it was great having her on today. Yeah, I'd love to have her back on the show for sure, man. Like it's
I
just
definitely think she will want to come back on the show
yeah,
from my understanding.
she's got some really cool perspectives on things. So, it was awesome having her on. It was funny when she thinks she's kind of not sure about that safety situation, eh? Like she even thinks, maybe and because if it was Pete and John, if they were still here, it was a Pete and John show still, like things would be a little more clear cut. I think that's where she's coming from. But now she's thinking,
100%.
okay, John, there was a restructure in this contract, and maybe John will look past the stupid little Twitter things, and maybe all that stuff is blown out of the proportion. Like, when he left, maybe it's not, but you just don't know. There's some uncertainty of like, because like I agree with her. Like, they could both be back. I don't think so, but or Quandre, I see the point. Like, you kind of want that veteran back there. Like, talent wise, sure, you could roll Kobe or roll Jared Reed and all this stuff, but are you comfortable with that, right? I mean, or you still have Julian Love, sorry, but and then Bobby, it's just like she said, you could maybe you clean freaking house. Like, get rid
All going to
of,
depend on who our head coach is in a
right? They
couple of
sit
weeks.
down, they have some conversations, and it's like, no, like, let's try to get these contracts off the books. Like, Summer, she doesn't seem to really be high on Draymond, and his contract's just that's a tough one to get out of, right? He just really didn't live up to that contract, right? But again, maybe he strives under a different DC. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's just so many unknowns. Like, and that's where they come in, and that's where they make the big money. Where John sits down with these guys, say, "Look, here's the guys. But no, I can take this guy and I can do this with him. This guy's a good player. You brought this guy in for a reason. Like, so there's gonna be a lot of that, right? And it's funny and then going to the head coach thing with talking to her. Uh, yeah, it's interesting. She sort of she wants that. She's just a defensive person, right? So she leaned towards that, but she seems open minded.
See, here's the thing for me, and this is what I'm going to say. Like, I loved having Dayna on because of that defensive perspective. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
I've known listening to her that she loves defense
yeah,
and that whole thing. So it was great because a lot of the guests we've had on have like lean into offense, lean into
yeah.
the offense.
Right, right,
So it gives us that other perspective on why. But I will say this to our listeners: if you're going to watch two games this divisional weekend and you're interested in what occurs for Seattle, you got to watch the Lions versus the Niners and
right.
see how Ben Johnson handles San Francisco and what his play calling looks like, because that is indicative if he gets the job or not. And I think John's
Hold
going to.
on, Lions against
Oh, sorry,
Bucks.
Lions against the Bucks. You're right.
Yeah,
Sorry, the correction. You're right. Lions
yeah.
versus Bucks. Um, so that'll be very interesting to see that. And I'm thinking if they get to the NFC Championship game,
Sure,
that'll be a
sure.
good one to look at.
Yeah.
The big one this weekend, though, for me that I'm going to be paying close attention to is Ravens Texans, because it's Mike
Mm,
McDonald, who's
yeah.
again a guy that's in the conversation for Seattle's job, defensive mind creative versus Bobby Slowick and the
Right.
Texans offense. So you're going to see those two kind of thought processes go against one another. And so I'll be, and especially like if Slowick's able to do some interesting things versus Baltimore,
Right.
he's doing that with a like completely inferior roster to what he would end up with in Seattle.
Oh yeah.
Um, like I'm very interested. Like for me, Bobby Slowick is slowly rising up that tier to being the number one guy I'd love to see in Seattle. Just because of what he did with Stroud. He's young. He's got a lot of the way he calls games are very similar to Kyle Shanahan, which is what we've been watching for years here, dice up teams. And I just his background with his dad and stuff, I feel just gives him an edge in some aspects to hiring a good defensive staff. And part of I said on the other podcast, I didn't actually say it to Dayna today though, but is that whole theory that you are interviewing some guys for that next wave when you look at coordinators.
Mm,
Maybe, the
yeah.
DC from the Raiders, Patrick Graham, or the guy from Carolina end up Seattle's DC next year, because again, John made it very clear it's not when Pete was here and Pete got to pick all of it. John has full control over the assistants even.
Mm-hmm.
He can hire Slowick and then say, here's the list of offensive and defensive coordinators. You can have your guy maybe in here and we'll take a look, but these are the guys I like.
Right.
So that'll be very interesting to see how that kind of shapes up here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's gonna happen quick here. So, and real quick, last thing is I think I still believe in that this has got to be the most desirable head coaching opening. I mean, if you're a guy, that's why I feel like John's gonna get who he wants, unless somebody just doesn't want to live in the Pacific Northwest. So like, no, it's too far. I'm an East Coast guy, or whatever. I mean, I could see that. But as far as a roster is concerned, as far as a city, as far as a culture, like you got all the pieces and a veteran GM that you're going to be working alongside with. Like everything sort of adds up to being a desirable spot. That's the way I look at it.
100%, man. I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be interesting. It is very desirable. I look at the only other gig out there that I look at where I go, yeah, that might just kind of outrank Seattle is probably the Chargers, just
Mm,
because they've got, again, young
Justin Herbert.
quarterback.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
young
exactly.
quarterback. And even Atlanta, like I know Belichick's probably going to end up in Atlanta. I think that's
Mm,
kind of the consensus everyone's saying now. But you can go and draft a quarterback high because you've got a higher pick in the draft.
yeah.
And that's where it's kind of interesting. And I think honestly, it's going to be very interesting to see what John does at the draft. And if they hire an offensive guy, hey, I need Jaden Daniels. Like that's going to make maybe John does trade up with Jaden Daniels. I'm still now growing more and more on JJ McCarthy, and a lot of people that know out there are probably going to think, what the hell is he talking about? This guy's supposed to know shit about quarterbacks.
Right.
The guy threw 10 passes in the national championship. Yeah, he threw 10. Watch his entirety of his college career. The kid is only 20 years old. He has not played a lot, which means you do not have to force him, which means some of these teams that are looking for impact starting quarterbacks aren't going to be high on drafting that kid.
Right.
So you can go and grab him. And like, here's another name I'm going to throw out there. And this may sound absolutely nuts. There is a potential for Zach Wilson to be available. I
Yeah.
think he's going to be available.
Yeah.
Another young guy that, maybe you get him out of New York and he's a different kid.
For sure. No.
He's
So
got all
fresh
the
starts.
talent.
Fresh starts are a big thing, man. So yeah, toss that on your list for sure because yeah, man, Zach still has potential in this league for sure, no question about it. Um, yeah, man, great episode tonight, guys. Uh, Dayna O'Gorman, check out her stuff, man. Find her on go to Twitter, right? Find her there first. Dayna OG Dayna OG. So find her there first, and then go follow her. Go get follow her. Go start listening to her podcasts wherever you get your audio. Because like she's just super insightful and really knows her football. Just all around the league, and then definitely knows Seahawks football. So uh, yeah, I just urge you to go check her out, follow her, and all that stuff. So uh, yeah, man, awesome tonight. We're gonna wrap it up, get out of here, and then we'll see you guys coming up on the next one.
See ya. Go Hawks.
Hawks.